All right, this is the lecture number 29. I think it's the final lecture in Introduction to Ethics, RPH 205. So some of the readings that I assigned for the last day are the same as the first day, but what I want you to think about is your reflections on the reading the first day of class. You could go back and look at your post if you like. But then what is it that you've learned now, not only within the class, but your whole Lion experience, on-campus events, other classes, if you work, if you're doing some work off campus, or your experiences growing up, or experiences you're having now during college in other venues rather than college. Just trying to bring your whole life together, whatever it is you want to include, and tie them to the readings for today. This class is about the question, what is health? And I started out early on with Aristotle's view of human flourishing, which is his view of health. And of course, it's comprehensive. It includes everything. And so we're going to go back to the what is college for, great ideas, and then the evidence of liberal arts. So there's evidence that students like you who go to small liberal arts colleges actually do lead. They are more engaged. The process actually works. But I think it will work a lot better if you actually know, keep reminding yourself what the process is. And also, if you know sometimes it's scary and sometimes you don't know where you're going, but at least I want you to know that the whole liberal arts thing involves letting go of a lot of previous assumptions and a worldview and expanding it. You can reject parts of what you grew up with, or you can basically accept them all, but you have to accept them for an entirely different reason. You have an entirely different foundation. Nothing is true because your mother said so, your father said so, your minister said so, your so-and-so, your coach said so. You might realize actually what these people said was true. They were right. But now you're embracing it. You're taking it on because I think this way. But there's bound to be things that your people who were your authority figures, you don't accept, or you just say they grew up not being aware of our need to adapt the green energy transition. And you will have to pick up from there, and it will be a radical change. So even the books I read don't mention that, but that is going to be the major factor in your life by the time you get to be 40 and the whole 25 years that you're actually trying to run the society. The weather is going to get worse and worse. There's going to be many disruptions. Technology, online communications can be even more fear-driven and more fake news and more alternative facts. It can get even worse, or it can start to get better. And that all depends upon whether people like you, your age, learn how to use your phones or your computers to get good information, or to find out what books that are out there that you need to read and put on the shelf. So I do want to point out to you that I do buy the books and I put them on the shelf. And I do that, there they are, because I want to look up. So I type out my favorite quotes and I teach them. but I always have those books up there, and I have them in the order that they make sense to me. So my brain will keep going there and then keep expanding. Then I read another book and it fits there and it fits there. So I'm constantly trying to expand my mind. And when I read things, it's amazing how quickly things change. Mr. Dershowitz's book was published in 2004. And, he talks about the millennials, and someone is saying, oh, but aren't they the great progressives and they're going to change the world? Look at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, like everything is going to be better. Golly. And he says, well, but that's not all it's about. It says it's a tool and it can get used. Well, now we know what Mr. Zuckerberg is doing with his tool. And he is really going for greed, and it's very corrupt. But even, to me, as recently as 2004, which of course might seem to you like ancient history, but that's 20 years ago. Then you read things from 10 years ago, and still there's so much that wasn't accounted for. And right now we're in the AI phase, but it's all about digital disruption and technological disruption. But I mean, anybody with a brain should know AI can go south or it can go north, right? It can improve our lives or it can destroy. Um, it can drive us back into a very primitive level of life. And it's a very serious alternative. The choices are getting more and more radical in terms of the consequences of choosing one or the other. And so because you're going to be running things and affected by things at some stage, getting higher on the hierarchy, governing and reflecting for 50 years now, you will have to process the half century that you were engaged in your cultural life. I'm 50 years older than you. And so I've reflected on that, but not in a way that wants to look backwards. And 50 years ago, I was thinking, we got to go green and we got to do this. And it wasn't done. So now in your generation, definitely things will start getting done. So I have grandchildren, and I'm happy to at least be able to tell them, you will make a difference. Like you will be on that cutting edge, whether you want to or not. I mean, you can deny climate change, or you can say there are going to be a lot of really good jobs related to climate change. But if it's not your calling, don't bother. It's not going to make you happy. So Mr. Dershowitz quoted a young woman who had a Columbia degree or something, and she got a job doing research in climate change. It was a coveted job, but she didn't like it. And she knew there were hundreds of other people that really felt called to do it. So she quit. She started a restaurant in a developing country or something. So, but everybody, no matter where they are in the world, in running her restaurant, she will have to figure out how to make it zero carbon and how to recycle waste. And, she will have to do the same things everyone will have to do, no matter what particular career path or multiple career paths they feel called to do. My oldest daughter, lives right outside of Washington, D.C., and lots of her friends and acquaintances, they do a similar kind of work, but in the private sector sometimes, in nonprofits sometimes, and in the government sometimes, because they can develop these skills where they know they can develop conversations between what would benefit the private sector and what would benefit government, like what laws should be made to stimulate a green economy. And if you know from the point of view of a corporation, and you know from the point of view of government, and then you also can figure out what sort of philanthropy would be most productive. So there's this constant, but it's always a sense of calling. Always, what can I do as far as I know that I really like to do? I feel at peace with the world. And the society needs it. And I can do it for the benefit of the people who need it. It will really make a difference. And that starts from when you're little. Mr. Dershowitz remembers reading books all the time, but he came from a family of engineers and scientists, and so he thought he had to go into something like that. And it took him until, I don't know, his mid to late 20s before he decided, I want to go in English. I like to read. You've liked to read since you were 8 years old. Like, why did you try not to be yourself, right? So you can soul search and figure out if there's something you remember that you were just passionate about. But always remember, you've got to do it in a zero carbon. And also not just zero carbon, but figuring out how not to use plastic. We have to have biodegradable plastic. So somebody in chemistry would have to figure out how to have a substitute for plastic. There's how are we going to reinvigorate deserts, make them into pasture land? How are we going to develop the next wave of renewable energy? Could be solar, could be wind, could be hydro, but let's go for something else. We could do solar, but not panels. Um, I know of a program where there are these, you put it in the asphalt in a road where the sun beats on the road and it creates power, energy. They have, the little cables to a power plant. So, the sun shines on the road, it's creating solar energy. Just lots of things like that. There's so much out there now, but there's also this incredible reason to start innovating. But you want to start a restaurant in Costa Rica? Go ahead. Whatever. I wanted to teach philosophy of all the crazy things. And I still think at the end of this class that when I thought young people really need to know the ideas that are driving us to where we are, and that idea that science and social science would save the world is a seriously flawed idea. That all we had to do is exploit nature forever and develop a system of social engineering and everybody would be good. This has not happened and we've got to stop. Sam Altman, the inventor of AI, is not going to save us, just like Mark Zuckerberg. Originally, he's going to save. No, he's not. Jeff beat these people. Come on, guys. Let's get it. Let's get it. The god Apollo, the god of reason, he was emotionally immature and he didn't care about justice. Hello, that's who we have today. So yeah, I was always motivated to let students know that America especially is the product of all these ideas and it's driving us into the ground. We have to change. We have to think differently. We have to think in terms of systems and integrating culture and nature and developing this much more holistic view of health. So that's the big idea, the holistic view of health. That is a great idea, and that should You should re-examine everything you were ever taught or assumed because the people you grew up with were not forward-looking enough. Some of them might have been, but majority of my students, parents and their communities are not looking ahead to the next 50 years. But you should, right? Liberally educated people need to lead. Take what's best from the past, but shine a light into the future. All right, so the first one is, oh, okay. It's the one that isn't. What is college for? So let's do that. We did that at the beginning. I hope you remember. Okay. All right. Now on your post, you could look back if you want, but you could just think about it off the top of your head if you want. It's not just about return on investment. You know, if you find something you're passionate about, you will end up finding a job, doing well at the job, getting the raises and promotion without selling your soul. If all you do is go in for the money, a huge percentage of those people have midlife crises. They quit or they get divorced and marry someone 20 years younger because they want to remember being a teenager again and not spending their lives doing something other people wanted them to do. It doesn't pay off. If you do what you love, you can make a middle-class salary. You're not going to overspend your money. You'll get Social Security like me, and you'll be fine. Okay? Okay, what you want is a rich inner life. You want independence of mind, a free mind. Liberal arts education is for a free mind. Liberal just means free. And you can't have a democracy unless you have really thoughtful people communicating with other people, bonding with other people, creating social networks, and speaking truth to power, exposing corruption in every role that anybody has. Most of the roles we play are unequal, relationships of inequality. But it takes a person who has a lot of self-knowledge, who's reflected a lot, who's serious, like they're self-controlled, courageous. They have all those Aristotelian virtues. And then they have a capacity to spot corruption, to explain why it's corruption, to call it out, and to keep the society honest. And that's the only way to preserve a democracy, to have citizens take turns ruling and being ruled, to have a peaceful transfer of power, to have campaigns actually telling people something like the truth, and people figuring out which politicians are manipulating them and which politicians are educating them. It's really important. Otherwise, you end up with a dictator who only uses his power to help his friends and harm his enemies. You have to find your own path in life. You have to enjoy your own company. Very important, those dang phones, you know. I have a student said when he was a junior, he realized he was addicted to his phone. Every time he had a quiet moment, he pulled it out of his pocket. And that's when he realized that. And he stopped. You know, he went on a social media diet, right? You have to be able to examine your choices and your relationships. You have to educate yourself. Instead, I don't know how many of you came to college without really knowing why you came to college other than that it's just the next thing to do, it's an expectation. But you need to throw that away and say, okay, I guess Dr. Beck and a lot of people at Lion want you to come away from Lion with a free mind, having been liberated. And doesn't mean you reject your past. It just means if you embrace it, it's for an entirely different reason. It's a different foundation. Okay, so society is trying to condition you to fit the mold, right? To just do what you're told all the way through life. And that's how you get rewarded. And I did pay a price for going a different way. I mean, society is really after you if you don't fit the mold. Okay, so is that what you want? Unlearn what you were given. So you could give examples in your post of how you feel like you were conditioned to think something that you now have second thoughts about. Given that we're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, this transition, does it serve you well or our society well to continue to indoctrinate you with the old paradigm? Fossil fuels forever, American domination forever, war as a solution to conflict forever, income inequality forever. Are you going to let yourself be socialized into making those things normal? I would not recommend it. You won't have much to pass down to your children, for one thing. The habit of skepticism. Doubt what you've been given. Come to your own conclusions. But with the awareness that you have a limited perspective, you have to continually change, continually reflect. Okay. All right. What's the teachers and your friends, right? He talks about having these late night conversations. Yes, we used to call them heavy rap, RAP. The professors expose you to new ideas. They echo your opinions back to you. So usually I make comments on the posts. I'm not as hard on students as I used to be. But I do it every week. So I usually tend to think positive, to emphasize, and then kind of push you a little further rather than to try and intimidate you or split hairs or something, even though I was trained to do that. I think it's more important that you get a bigger vision, that you expand your vision of who you are and where you're going and where the society's going. Either understand why you're right. Why are you right about some things? Why are you wrong about other things? And why are you just limited? You're 18 to 22 years old, I, there's certain things that I haven't changed my mind about since I was 8 years old, is what I naturally think about. But the way I think about it and the relationship between my thinking about it and the world I live in has changed radically over the years. So there's a certain core calling, and then there's all the other stuff that happens in life. College is an opportunity to stand outside of the world, right? Distance yourself from the world. Think and reflect before your life begins. Because once it does, it's very hard to get outside of the mold. And for me, I had a kid when I was 21. I was married. And it was really hard. I didn't fit inside the mold as a mom, and that was super hard. Society just really wants you to kowtow and and put up with secondary status. Now, a lot of women today, they don't have children when they're younger, and there is basically society molds people to put their kids in daycare after 3 to 6 months, which, isn't necessarily a good idea. It doesn't make for good poets or people who think outside the box, but it certainly should be an option, and it shouldn't be denigrated. Now it's kind of almost forced. It's just kind of crazy that we went from, if you put children in daycare, they're going to be serial killers. That's kind of what was. My daughter was born 50 years ago, and I stayed in school. And oh my, this is, your kid is going to get all messed up. Well, no, sorry. Now it's the opposite. Marco Rubio says, if you don't put your kid in daycare and get back to work, you're not patriotic. Like, what? He's a conservative? Wow. Boy, has that changed. Anyway, I'm just giving you an example of how radically things change. So right now, it's not kosher or cool to put things in recycling, as far as I can tell on the Lyon campus. But someday, in the not too distant future, I think you're going to get big trouble if you don't recycle or, have some green products around. I mean, the pressure will go the other way. You want to leave college with the skills to live more responsibly, be more alert, be a good citizen, and think like a citizen, which I've said over and over that Aristotle is really important. Soul making. You're creating your soul. You have your heart and your intellect reflects on what you feel. Its action is tied to this reflection. You have to have good reasons to make the choices you make and come up with new creative ways to reform our society. And again, that goes back to Aristotle's virtues, which I really didn't want to go through again. It's, I've thrown that at you for a long time. I think I'll put the attachment once again, the 2-page cheat sheet. I'll put it on this module, but you could easily find it. We are all on a pilgrimage to find your calling. And I remember in college, I read the book Pilgrim's Progress, and I wanted to spend my January term, because there were these just 1-month classes, writing my own version of Pilgrim's Progress. But my teacher didn't want me to. He wanted me to take a class, right? He wanted me to fit the mold. So I just didn't take a class in January. I just took care of my baby. All right, so the chapter on excellent sheep, on great books. So another chance to examine these questions, because I had you reflecting on these questions the beginning of the class, I think the second class. So now you reflect on them again, like, have you grown? And this is not me trying to do an evaluation of my class. I don't want you to feel like, what does she want me to say? Well, she wants me to say how wonderful her class is. No, I want you to be thinking about everything that went on in the semester, in college, or in life, because that's what you need to learn how to do. This class just reminds you of your greatest task in life is the art of creating your life. It's the greatest artwork we ever engage in. It's the art of creating your life. So, have you learned how knowledge is created in college? Are you learning about how scientists, social scientists, and literature, they all expand your knowledge base in some meaning of the word knowledge? How do you think they fit together, right? How does self-knowledge fit with social science, right? Because, for example, Gallup polls, they always tell you what the average person thinks. Well, the average person isn't thinking, or they're not reflecting, that's for sure. They're just imitating. So how much of a Gallup poll culture is really just propaganda, brainwashing, trying to put official social science, legitimacy, a stamp of approval onto don't think outside the box. Just do, just fit in. And that's, the Gallup poll thing is for people that don't go to the elite schools. In the past, the people who went to the elite schools were the ones who were supposed to be thinking outside of the box and leading. Well, now we know that they aren't. They're just getting molded to conform, but they get the higher paying jobs. Well, and then it's people like first generation students that are actually going to lead us out of this um, black hole that we've gotten ourselves into. Humanities majors are well equipped to handle complexity, ambiguity, to think creatively, to communicate. Do you think, okay, do you anticipate that, even in the business world, that you're ready to adapt, to give up assumptions? Are you aware that the future will be different than the past? Do you want to be a leader? Okay. Do you see yourself as inventing a new industry? I know a lot of students create a small business online, and that's good. It's great. Okay, so Mr. Dershowitz cites Aristotle as one example of being forced to think about the hardest things people have ever thought about. Now, I've spent this whole class, trying to link what's going on in our society with Aristotle. So, does that make sense to you? Is it a good habit of mind to notice which virtues you're exercising as you go through your daily life? Is it a good exercise to frame things in terms of, well, there's this or this? What would be the best choice among the alternatives, the mean between extremes? Why would it be best? Try to persuade the people involved, including your parents, right? So now you think, did that work? Do I think like Aristotle? Do Aristotle's ideas really fit with the inner dialogue of the soul with itself, or the kinds of dialogues I get into with friends? Um, Using Aristotle's model, what does the author mean when he says liberal arts education helps you learn to reflect in the widest and deepest sense for the sake of citizenship, for the sake of living well with others, for the sake of building a self that is strong and creative and free? So, if you remember, you had the personal virtues, the social virtues, the political virtues, thinking like a citizen. Scientific knowledge relates to external reality. Humanistic knowledge relates to our experience of the world, to what reality feels like. So, I think this is important because what my experience of Batesville, Arkansas, and how it feels like for me to live in Batesville is very, very different from other people's. And each person, has a different relationship to Batesville, Arkansas. And it's connected to their experiences, but also to the worldview they came with before they came here. And I just respect it. I don't disagree with other people. But I think novels, poems, short stories, those are about the kinds of things that that reflect on, that articulate the fact that each of us has this inner life that we impose onto the world around us, or is a result, the world around us sort of leads us to create. It's this creative process of adapting or refusing to adapt or whatever it is. But that's humanities. The reason we read great literature is to see if the authors may know you better than you know yourself. Have you ever had that experience? And I said at the beginning of the semester, yeah, my gosh, when I read Plato, he stole all my best ideas, right? I love that idea, know thyself. Like, oh, all right. And that's how you learn. Like, wow, I don't know if you'll ever have that experience, and then you also have to remember that for Mark Zuckerberg, reading about Augustus Caesar, the emperor, who, had to break a few things to create this great Pax Romana, that was reminded him of himself. Like that was his aspiration. I don't think he's creating a Pax Romana, right? Now, the people who run Facebook know that anger, if you can post things that make people angry, then you get attention, right? And if you can undermine people's instinctual drives, you can get attention. That is not a Pax Romana, but Zuckerberg doesn't care. But he did go to a fancy prep school, and they do read the classics. And the question is, wow, what they learned from studying Plato and Aristotle in the Roman Empire, whatever, is really different from what I learned. And you just have to accept it. But the very fact that these books inspire people and they affect, we're living in a world where at least some of the people driving it read those books and adapted them in a certain way. It's nice to know what they did with the books because it tells you something about our culture. Has a work of art taught you what it feels like to be somebody else? You aren't at the center of the universe. Art teaches empathy and cultivates emotional intelligence. Maybe it can make you a better person. I hope so. I mean, that is what the artists want. They want to teach you how to live better, the art of living. All real art is educational. It's trying to educate your emotions, your way of life, because that's the ultimate artwork. Do you think of the social sciences as oversimplified, where the humanities is all about unintended consequences, complexity, the disasters that result when you think you know more than you know, etc. So you could think, because my students, again, a lot of them are in psychology, they learn a lot. I know because when I taught logic, a lot of the logical fallacies were things they had learned in psychology class. And they have learned a lot about their own upbringing and their own psyche, but it tends to be things that abnormal psychology, things that go wrong, or what's normal and what's not. And so they don't tend to be a model like Aristotle's of a flourishing life that you aspire to. But I'm not sure. I just, from what I know of social science research, it isn't visionary. Or you could say, you could take a poll, a survey, how many people think if they vote for Trump, they'll be richer. And so that's fine. It's just that it's not true. It's not likely. And that isn't really a vision. That's a fantasy projected into the future. A vision is, what is the good life? How can I lead? But again, I just don't know. And I've read a lot of social science, but not enough to make a claim. I know that the research my students come up with in their research paper tends to be just reinforcing over and over again that social media is harmful, or that body image on social media has created body dysmorphia. People get obsessed about what their bodies look like. And so men go and try to get real buff or whatever. And women, of course, do their thing. But that's fine. It's just not a vision. What do you want? Where do you want to go? Given the books that we read in this class, the best way to move forward, just say, okay, I don't have the body I used to have. I have a metabolic disorder. or I'm heading toward it. So I want to move on. So I don't want to get diabetes or metabolic disorders. So I want to eat better and exercise, but I don't want to be obsessed about that. I want to flourish in these higher order ways. And I don't want my eating to get in the way, to create an obstacle and a distraction and to undermine my health. But that's a very different thing than just research that confirms that this is what sugar does to your body. And that's why I like Mr. Lutzig's book, because he says you really want overall contentment, the overall happiness, and that's a totally different chemistry in your brain. Serotonin. Well, how do I do that? How do I rewire my brain? Okay, well, you have to have an idea. And that's where I think that's where great ideas like Aristotle's come in. What about economics? And Mr. Dershowitz talks a lot about how many students in the Ivy League schools major in economics, just huge. A third, half, finance. It's all about money. And people believe that it's a virtue to calculate the most efficient means to your own economic self-interest. Well, it's not working. Very few people are getting very rich. Everybody else is getting more desperate. That isn't what Aristotle thought, right? The art of statecraft is the art of weaving together the rich and the poor. And the economic system should just be run on the theory of the household, and that you raise your children, you live your life in a way that is moderate, and you meet basic needs. But basic needs include education, the arts, all sorts of things that we don't normally think of as basic. Physical fitness, music lessons or dance lessons or drawing lessons. That's part of what you need in a liberal arts education, but also just for balanced body chemistry for the rest of your life. So, all right. So this is the way economics is taught. The idea that this is rational to worry about your income more than anything else. The fact that so many of the best and brightest go into this and have that philosophy, that's a red flag. And that's what's driving us into the ground. We don't switch to green energy. The Chinese are going to wipe us out. We're not going to compete in the business sector because we have this totally dated view of our economic self-interest. It has been fossil fuels. It's not anymore, but we can't change. So, have you ever had the experience of reading history or the ideas and realizing that those ideas, thoughts, feelings of character in the past have had a profound effect on the way you think, feel, and live? So that's why I taught Descartes, Kant, Locke, Mill, Marx, because I think they do have an effect. And as you read them, did it occur to you that, well, yeah, this is how I think? And my punchline there is none of these are functional anymore. We have to change. Why do you think the author says the best thing that could happen to our culture now is the Asian and Latino kids get socialized into American culture so that they get the degrees and all that, but then they go on to change it, to create a new type of Western or American culture? I really do agree with this. Do you agree that as an adult, you have to go way beyond exercising a skill you were trained to do and also see yourself as part of a system? okay? A lot of effort at Lion is made to bring all the employees into the community, to bring students in. So the college experience is supposed to be this complete immersion, and people do care about you, and they want to see students grow from freshman year to senior year, to go from point A to point B. But each student, it's a different point A and it's a different point B. But what we all want to see is that it's different. They end up different. And then the last is this evidence of liberal arts, which again is just social science research directed toward that specific issue, which is, did it work? Did liberal arts, is there social science evidence, empirical evidence that liberal arts makes a difference? And the chapter has a lot about the Greeks, and that was my training, but I won't get into that. What is liberal arts? The content of study is non-vocational, like philosophy, that you study a lot of different kinds of knowledge. You develop intellectual skills, analytical reasoning, creativity. You discuss these things in class. I don't just lecture. The coursework emphasizes discussion of questions that don't necessarily have a right answer. Not only that, but the best answer for what to do now is not going to be the best answer 10 years from now. So you have to constantly be fluid about it. You are required to write papers for most courses. Seminars are, so students take a large part in class discussion. So that's how I do my classes, and that's common at Lion. The context, this is more important, right? So I know that I'm only a drop in the bucket, and the climate I try to create in my class is just a small part of the overall climate. So the context is, it's not only just the teaching, but it's a community. Students, faculty, and staff interact with each other in meaningful ways. So I have relationships with other staff members, other faculty members, but we all, I mean, truly, the ones that I like, and that's most of them, they're always saying positive things about students, or the encouraging things. Sometimes they get annoyed with a student, just like, you love your kids, but you can get annoyed with them. But in general, they're all on board with the mission of Lion. The president is very much on board with the mission of Lion. We've added these professional schools, dentist and veterinary. She just keeps saying, but Lion is the core, because liberal arts changed her life. She went there in one place and she graduated in another place and just kept going. Professors encourage strengths and weaknesses of different views, learn about, frequent conversations. So this is, what Mr. Dershowitz said about college. There's also, in loco parentis, you have other adults that are mentoring you and guiding you. You talk to faculty outside of class, and I'm very available, but not very many. First of all, there's only a small minority of Americans that go to college. Then there's a minority of those that graduate from college. And then there's even a much smaller number that actually have the liberal arts college experience. What are the outcomes? Living lives of consequence. So they do take up leadership roles. They are civically involved. They're generous with time and money and expertise. They continue to learn, and they're culturally involved with the arts, other artistic pursuits. They accomplish a lot. They're satisfied with their life and career, they're reflective, and they're successful, but according to their own definition. But yes, also according to, it's just not necessarily when you go to an Ivy League, it doesn't mean you make a ton of money. It doesn't mean you teach at Yale or Harvard. And this guy who went to all the fancy schools and taught at Yale, he just said you can get a much better education at a less prestigious school. And that's what happened to me. I went to a very prestigious school my freshman year. At the end of my sophomore year, I quit. I was so disillusioned. These people weren't what I thought they were. Similar to what Mr. Dershowitz says, slightly different in the 60s, but then I went to a much less prestigious school and I had a teacher who was a true mentor and he changed my life. So of course I wanted to be that teacher, but I also know that most of my students, it wasn't their philosophy professor that changed their life. It might have been their friends. This is true of my own children. I have 3 children. They didn't, they either, well, I guess they all took philosophy. 2 of them did not like their philosophy classes, but they weren't at all the same classes as the kind that I teach. And then the other one liked her class, but that also was a totally different kind of philosophy class. So yeah, it's very fluid, really. It's kind of frightening how open-ended the whole process is. What's the impact? Okay. The context, the culture we have is more important than the content, which particular classes you take. But so all of the outcomes are correlated with context, the community, some with content. Okay, neuroscience sort of reinforces that. I wrote a book on neuroscience and ancient Greek culture. Um, the content has to be broad, but it doesn't really matter what it is. These schools don't have to be expensive, and there's a higher percentage of lower income students at liberal arts colleges, which is nice. We just have more scholarships. So what the students at Lyon get is that they get a really high quality, expensive kind of education, but they don't have to pay as much as it costs. They get a lot of scholarship money, but then they get to interact with students in a lot of different race, class, gender, sexual orientation. They do get exposed to a lot of diversity and then a lot of dialogue. The results, 25% more likely to lead later on in life. That's a big result because it's very hard to use this kind of evidence-based social science research to prove things because life is so complicated and there's so many factors involved that might cause a person to take on a leadership position. But this is just a consistent statistic, which is very amazing. 25% more likely to donate time and money, donate a higher percentage of their income, volunteering. They're lifelong learners, 30%, 33% more involved in cultural life. Versus business and accounting majors are 30% less likely to be continuing learners. And social sciences. Also, most of them are very engaged in public life. Getting an advanced degree. Those who have a non-vocational major are more likely to go to grad school, okay? If you had business or accounting major, you're much less likely. Math or science, okay. So mostly business or accounting, you're less likely to go on in school. So the leaders have larger perspectives and they know how to create community. Okay, so it's good. And then they give the history. And so because I, that's my background is in that history, Plato's Plato's Academy. But I guess I'll end with this one quote that I actually quoted. Um, there's just a lot of evidence that businesses are looking for people with social emotional skills, of course, but also communication, negotiation, creativity, problem solving, blah, blah. Um, but the dean at, oh yeah, these are quotes from people who went. So I think you'd be interested. They're people like you and how it is that liberal arts changed their lives. And then the last quote would be from the dean of Yale, if I can find it. Yeah, oh, I just saw it. And oh, well, all right. It's about America, and it's about the unique place of liberal arts education in the US. We are losing liberal arts institutions. I guess we lost about 200 of them. And it's okay with me if we lose some of them because it's a lot of money. And it's very possible that the wealthy people who give the philanthropy to keep them going could put it in other projects. My son and his wife teach at charter schools, inner city charter schools. That's another really important place for philanthropy to invest so that those kids get a chance to qualify to go to college or to go to good colleges. So there's a lot just in the field of education. Um, but I definitely think we should have a lot we still have a lot of liberal arts colleges. And I do think, we don't, we should keep them, the ones we have, as much as we can. And they're being trashed and ignored and criticized. And I'm not sure how many people are going to fight, people with money are going to fight back and support these colleges. But here's what the guy from Yale says. This is 1848. And so Mr. Dershowitz's book is about how Yale has changed, unfortunately, you know. Um, he says, our Republican form of government, the US, as opposed to Europe, renders it highly important that great numbers should enjoy the advantages of a thorough education. On the Eastern continent, the few who are destined to particular departments in public life, in political life, may be educated for that purpose, while the mass of people are left in comparative ignorance. So even on the East Coast, there's more of a recreation of the same kind of hierarchy that there was in Europe. But in this country, I guess he's talking about Europe, the European continent, actually. In this country, where offices are accessible to all who are qualified for them, superior intellectual attainments ought not to be confined to any description of persons. Merchants, manufacturers, farmers, as well as professional gentlemen, take their places in our public councils. A thorough education ought, therefore, to be extended to all these classes. That means social class and economic class. It's not sufficient that they be men of sound judgment who can decide correctly and give a silent vote on great national questions. Their influence on the minds of others is needed, and influence to be produced by extent of knowledge and the force of eloquence. So they also have to be persuasive speakers. So just to show you that the tradition is being carried on, but not in the elite schools necessarily. So this is, the quotes from students say that the students testify that some of them came from small towns. Okay, yeah, from I was surrounded by students from 7 different countries, right? I was a foreign student, so there is a lot of this mixing interacted in me, a true love for the world of ideas. The faculty members did that. I learned from upperclassmen who guided me through being from a farming area. So a lot of Lion students are from rural areas. It's very important. And that was important to the leaders of our society, the dean of Yale, you know. We need all these people to be educated. And I agree with that completely. And we are not going to be able to keep our democracy unless we have enough liberally minded leaders to move us forward. As of what, January 15th or January 10th, 2025, we're in trouble. But I've always liked my job, and I think it really has a place in the world and in the society. So that's the last lecture as far as I know. And I hope you enjoyed the class, and you will have to write your paper, your final, what is health? And if you are taking the class asynchronously, you need to email me for a time to Zoom, and then you present your paper. You can also have a conference where you come with an outline and we hash out what your final paper might be like. And then you do have to come and give a formal presentation. And there is a speaking rubric there at the end of the class, the last module. And that's what I'll be looking for. You have a clear thesis, that the argument makes sense, that you know the material, and that you can answer questions. Those are the 4 main criteria. Okay, thank you.